Afternoon, everyone. We're here in the Monterey One Water Boardroom. This is a meeting of the Recycled Water Committee of Monterey One Water. It's Thursday, November 16th, 2023. It is 3 p.m., perhaps 3:01. 4 members of the committee are present. So I'll call this meeting to order and ask for a roll call on members present.
Pacific Grove.
Here.
Veranda.
Here.
Marina Coast.
Here.
Castroville.
Here.
Monterey.
And we're waiting on Tyler. So we will go to item 3, additions to the agenda. Do we have any additions to the agenda from the committee or staff?
None from staff.
Seeing none up here. I'll call for a motion to approve this agenda.
So move.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, passes unanimously. Agenda is approved. We'll go on to item 5, public comments. This is general public comments on items not appearing on today's agenda, and members of the public may make comment now on such items. I do not see any members of the public in the audience, so therefore we'll look to the online attendees. Does anyone online wish to make a general public comment on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll close public comment, general public comment. We'll move on to item 6, approval of the Recycled Water Committee minutes of October 19th, 2023. And before that, I will recognize Director Williamson as is now present at the meeting. So all 5 of us are here. Item 6, RWC minutes.
Move approval of the recycled water minutes of October 19th.
And we have a motion and a second by Director Habino. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. No opposition. Passes unanimously. Minutes are approved. Move on to item 7, update on Pure Water Monterey and Pure Water Monterey expansion projects. Dave Lindow, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith and committee members. So Pure Water Monterey is just past 12,600 acre feet towards a current water production. Everything is running smoothly. And of course, with the recent first autumn rains coming through, the plant will be looking for opportunities as the CSIP demand drops off to put more water in the ground for Pure Water Monterey. On expansion, all systems go. The contractors are firming up their purchase orders, getting firm delivery times, et cetera, will allow us to verify, confirm our schedule going forward. But it's all good so far. With that, hand it back to the chair.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm sure we'll have a couple comments. Any board member comments on PWM?
Thanks for your continued good work monitoring that for us, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, I didn't have any questions or anything. Okay, we'll accept the report and move on to item 8, which is, let me get back to my agenda here. Item 8, consider recommending award of construction contract to Monterey Peninsula Engineering for the Salinas Valley Reclamation Project Pond Liner Replacement Project in the amount of $885,000. And I will ask.
That's me.
Oh, okay. Jennifer. We'll ask Jennifer Gonzalez to report.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. Jennifer Gonzalez, Engineering Manager. The SVRP has an 80 acre foot storage pond, which holds recycled water prior to distribution to the CSIP system. M1W completed a pond liner evaluation in 2017 to look at the estimated remaining useful life of the liner at that time. It was identified to be about 7 years, which it brings us to 2023. M1W has patched numerous areas of the liner during annual maintenance to extend the life as much as possible from its original installation in 1996. In collaboration with Monterey County Water Resources Agency, the budget for the construction of the pond liner replacement was included in this year's WRA supplied budget. The project was advertised for bid on October 6th, and a mandatory pre-bid meeting and job walkthrough was held on October 16th, and was attended by 4 potential bidders at the time. On November 2nd, only one bid was received from Monterey Peninsula Engineering for $885,500, which is well below the engineer's estimate and the budgeted amount. Staff asks that the Recycled Water Committee recommend that the board award a contract to Monterey Peninsula Engineering for the Salinas Valley Reclamation Project Pond Liner Replacement Project in the amount of $885,500. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions by directors? Director Moore?
So what causes damage to a liner that might limit its life to 7 years or whatever the limit is?
Sure. So we're actually approaching 30 years at this point on the actual liner. The biggest factor is exposure to UV.
UV,
From
okay.
the sun.
Even though a bunch of it's covered with water, the UV gets through and
Yeah, and it's empty for portions of the year, but it's really that upper portion that is in the worst shape.
okay. Any idea why we, with 4 firms that attended the pre-bid conference, but then we only got 1 bid? Any idea why?
It's a pretty specialized type of work, and most of the others that came to the pre-bid were not interested in
Learning how to do it?
branching out. Yeah, it's going to be mostly done by a subcontractor, but MP was willing to go out and work with them.
Glad to see that it came in under the engineer's bid, assuming, of course, that the engineer's bid was accurate.
We hope so.
Estimate, rather.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rubino?
So on the pond liner, like, has technologies changed? Could we expect another 30 years out of this
We
one?
can expect a similar amount of time. It has not changed significantly. So we wouldn't expect it to be longer or much shorter. We're requesting the same type of liner,
Okay.
which is 60 mil HDPE liner. It's pretty standard for this type of work in the industry.
And have they relayed to you any supply chain issues?
It's going to be about a 6 to 8 week supply. And so we're actually kind of getting a head start on it. They are going to get me submittals next week, even though we haven't awarded the contract yet, so that I can look at the material and get things ready to go the morning after the board meeting.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And you're right, Ken, the schedule is going to be really critical here. If it takes 8 weeks to get the material and hopefully a month or so to install, if that's delayed, obviously with CSIP coming online in February, March, it starts being a little tight. So
Should
they'll
we
keep
have a
tabs on that,
Wet spring.
hopefully.
We're actually hoping for a wet spring
Yeah.
because that'll make this,
That's true.
Make it
Hopefully.
last a little longer.
yeah,
Probably going to happen.
Harder to install
true.
the underwater.
Yeah.
We're living underwater. Okay, Director Williamson?
Well, so before you responded to the question earlier about the deterioration of the liner, I was going to ask, how do you tell? But I imagine that it's easier to determine that from the top portion. But what about the bottom part? Like, are there parts of it that you can't tell that are deteriorated?
No, we actually did like destructive testing of the liner. And so we took samples from all different areas of the pond. The evaluation report was actually about 150 pages, and they went into some real depth in how long we could expect it to last.
So on these sort of liners, so it's a polyethylene liner. Just imagine that black plastic. They'll take out little samples and then they weld in patches. They take those samples to the lab and they pull on them, do destructive testing in terms of tensile strength primarily. And then they actually look under a microscope on how it tears. And I guess you lose some volatility over time with UV degradation and it loses its tensile strength. And that's sort of generally the failure mode. To your point, Kent, it's weird. The material hasn't changed in all these years. When I was in Tahoe, we had a bunch of these that were umpteen years old. And when we replaced it, it was replaced in kind. The only difference nowadays, the materials are more resilient where it's easier for our people to do repairs and welds. If you go back probably 20 years ago, and I don't know, Jen, it's true here, you always had to go to a specialty contractor.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can buy that welding stuff yourself and do your repairs. In terms of what damages it, besides UV, and we're very fortunate that it's just UV. Up there, we had bears get stuck in it. And when bears get stuck, they don't like it, so they start using their claws to get in. And so we had tears all over the place. So our guys would go out and just do those little spot repairs, which are very effective on a liner of this surface area.
Okay, go ahead and check with the public online to see if there's any comment. And if not, we'll bring it back to the board for action. And I see none. So
Oh,
I'll,
sorry.
okay. This is on item 8. Keep in mind.
Go ahead, Aide.
Hello?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, Mo.
Okay, okay, sounds good. You mentioned the deterioration of the liner and how other animals might also be causing that deterioration. Is there any evidence or like any data that because of the deterioration, some of the particles might affect the water quality or affect the wildlife in general?
This is really not a Q&A, but feel free to make your comments and we'll try to get your question answered at the end.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Cortez. Staff, do you have a response? I think she's the only comment, and I'll close public comment on the item and ask staff to.
So I apologize. The example I gave was not for here. So we haven't, to my knowledge, had animals damaging the liner. The degradation is more volatiles. It is not particulates going into the water. So there, to my understanding, there's not a water quality impact of just having this liner in place, if that helps answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We'll bring it back to the board for action.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Moore, second by Director Rubino. Looks like no discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez, and we'll move on to item 9. This is Mr. Holden on consider recommending approval of a contract with Larry Walker Associates Incorporated for NPDES permit services, including for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project for a not to exceed amount of $635,800. Mr. Holden, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. Yes, I'm Bob Holden, principal engineer, retired. So Monterey One Water owns a 60-inch ocean outfall pipeline that discharges our excess secondary effluent, saline, and saline waste under a national pollution discharge and elimination system, NPDES permit. So California American Water would like to collaborate with us to use the ocean outfall for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, desal project. So in September of this year, the board, approved the outfall capacity negotiation, cooperation, and funding agreement with CalAm, including 2 tasks. NPDES permitting task, so that's what we're talking about today, and the design outfall improvements project, which I intend to come back to you in January with. So we had requests for proposals for the first task, advertised October 13th. We received 1 proposal from Larry Walker Associates Incorporated on November 3rd for the $635,800, as you mentioned. The costs predominantly include the project management, coordination, preliminary ocean plan compliance assessment, iterative process. You have to go through it kind of over and over with different scenarios to come up with the result, and submittal of a report of waste discharge. So ammonia reduction was identified in the request for proposal, but is not included in the contract, as we won't know if it's needed or to the extent it's needed until after the initial tasks are completed. Staff ask this committee to recommend that the board award approval of a contract with Larry Walker Associates for NPDES permit services, including the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project for not to exceed amount of $635,800. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And Bob, may I just try to
Yeah.
clarify one thing? Correct me. So the recommended action is to get a contract with Larry Walker. What the end result of this is what Bob just mentioned, is a report of waste discharge for adding brine to our NPDES would be submitted to the regional board for consideration to modify our NPDES. So that's sort of the end result that we're looking at. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Just want to make sure you understood where we're going with this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Holden, Mr. Shuto. And I'll ask the committee if we have any questions on the presentation. Any questions? Tom, go ahead.
So I just want to be clear, the consultant will be applying for a revision to our existing NPDES, correct? And as part of that application process, this report must be created,
Correct.
must be
Yes.
written. So obviously, in order to figure out what goes into the report, don't they have to have some information from CalAm?
Correct.
Can you talk about the sort of information that's necessary?
Right. So CalAm provided us, they started out with just the basics of, for producing this much product water, drinking water, they would be providing us with this much brine. So like 5 different flow ranges, flow values. And then they've provided us with expected water quality of that brine, expected water quality of the water from the slant wells. They've provided information about the pumping rate that they can, the rate that they can pump brine to us. They're intending to have I think it's a 3 million gallon brine storage pond at their facility. And so they would be able to pump water from that pond to us, as well as pump it directly to us.
Okay, so some follow-ups. You said they gave you 5 different quantities to put into this. Why did they give you 5 different quantities? What was the cause of different quantities? Or
Right. So so essentially they're planning on a 4.8 MGD facility, which would provide us with 7.2 MGD of brine. Ultimately, they hope to go to a 6.4 MGD facility with 9.6 MGD of brine. But they also gave us then 3 other alternatives of, if they had just 1, 2, or 3 trains online at the facility, they would produce 1.2, 2.4, or 3.6 MGD of drinking water and give us 1.8, 3.6, or 5.4 MGD of brine. So we need to model outfall discharge for those different scenarios. And sort of counterintuitively, what we found last time, we were doing the same kind of work for CalAm back in 2019 when they had to stop and things changed in terms of size of the facility and stuff. But what we found out then was that the lower the brine flow, the more difficult it is to meet ocean plan requirements. Need to qualify that. That's lower enough flow as long as it's a sinking effluent. At the diffusers, if it's buoyant, the higher the flow, anyway.
buoyancy is going to be connected to the quality of what they put in, correct?
It's going to be connected to the TDS. So brine is going to sink. Our effluent rises, it's more buoyant. So hence the depending on the water quality going into the outfall, it will change the characteristics on when it hits goes out the diffusers in the outfall. So, what Bob just talked about was Cal-Am, just like we do, will operate their plant at different ranges. So it's sort of the boundary conditions or their operating parameters from what they're building versus how it will go into effect. And they need to take into account all of that from flow rate, water quality, and total volume.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a handle on what this permit is likely to have to say.
And we've talked to the regional board, and this permit is going to be complicated because of the number of variables that our outfall could see every single day between what Bob just identified on brine, but also our effluent going out there or not, our concentrate going out there or not, or any iteration of that.
Right, right. So with the expansion, which will be in place before desal,
Yeah.
The amount of concentrate we provide may be initially higher than the amount of brine, or at least similar, and it may behave quite differently than the higher flows. So it is really complicated. This is part of the response, Cal-Am's response to the Coastal Commission approval. We are one of the limitations. Cal-Am has to figure out how to make it work for us.
So one thing you said that's a little concerning is they've asked us to get a permit for a 4.8 MGD plant, but they hope to go to 6.4. So which are we actually going to get a permit for? Are we going to be actually getting a permit for a hypothetical future plant that might never be built?
No, we would be just asking for the 4.8 MGD facility. In our meetings, they have told us that the 6.4, they expect maybe 10 years later. We have a 5-year cycle on the NPDES permits. So we wouldn't, you only ask for what you're going to do within that 5 years.
Okay, and then you have to go back for what? Another study, another report, and a renewal of the permit?
Right. So we're actually right in that process now for our permit that'll be approved, well, maybe in October.
Okay. And then you mentioned the slant wells, but the slant wells, as I understand it, are primarily the proposed source of water for the desal plant. What does pumping from the slant well fields have to do with our NPDES permit?
So good, really good questions. So because we don't have a plant, we can't measure the constituents in the brine. So what our consultants do is take the slant well constituents, assume worst case scenario of 100% removal of everything through the RO process. And they then come up with characteristics of the brine. If some of the constituents then might be a concern for the ocean plan compliance, then we go back and look and see if the membrane actually takes out that, 100%, or maybe it's more like 70 or 80%.
Okay. And I guess last question, one of my longstanding concerns about the project proposal in the beginning is Cal-Am's EIR said, once we operate this plant, only 8% of the water we pull up from the slant wells is going to be potable Salinas Valley groundwater. But that's I think the industry, as far as I can tell, refers to that by the acronym WAG. It's a wild guess. How are we going to handle, first of all, who's responsible for monitoring and ensuring compliance with the new NPDS? Presumably we get to that point and we get the new NPDS. Who's on the hook for that?
We are on hook for NPDS. It's
Okay.
our permit. Yes, our monitoring, our everything, which is.
So if at some point in time, what the slant wells are pulling up is 20% Salinas Valley groundwater because a big bolus of rainwater soaked into the ground has now slid its way towards the coast, going by those slant wells, could that potentially push us out of compliance with that NPDS?
No, it'd be the opposite way. If it's more dilute, then salinities would be lower and they'd be more buoyant. So it'd be higher dilution. And
Right.
so that works.
And in the other direction, since Cal-Am, when I've raised this point, I've heard from Cal-Am supporters say, oh, no. Once the slant wells are working, we'll get almost 100% seawater.
Right. So we're, we expect that'll be all covered within the plan that we go through. We also then, as part of this process, are coming up with all the assumptions like what the salinity is and things like that. And if it's not resolved otherwise, it would be put into the permit that we would issue Cal-Am to receive their brine. And they would have to meet certain maybe salinity, temperature, suspended solids, potentially ammonia, boron, and a few other chromium limits in their discharge to us as kind of like any industrial user, except it'd be a special case.
Okay. Given some of the uncertainties, I'd love to be able to see this report before we actually submit it to the Regional Water Quality Control Board and have the board weigh in on it.
That's
Is that a
board prerogative? Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be the most complicated NPDS permit in California and maybe the world. So I think it's quite appropriate for you to want to see what we're submitting.
Any other questions, board members? Okay, I'll check with the public really quick and see if anyone has any public comment on this item 9 on the Larry Walker and Associates contract. I do not see any hands yet. So go ahead and close public comment on that. Again, for the record, there's no members of the public in the chamber. And we'll bring it back to the board for further discussion and action. Can you say it into the mic? Sorry, we're like not hearing. I'm not hearing it today. Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
And I'd be happy to second that if the maker of the motion includes that before the actual application and the report, et cetera, is submitted to the
Regional Water Quality
Regional Water
Control
Quality
Board.
Board and other approval authorities above us, that be brought back to the board for.
Yeah, as long as Tom agrees to read it all. Give us a synopsis. As long as you agree to read it all and give us a synopsis.
Okay.
That amendment.
See, I think I'll be,
That's good discussion right there. That's the kind of discussion I like to hear.
Actually.
Yeah.
Ron, I think I'll be retired by then, so I'll have the time.
Hold on a sec. Point of order here. So we had the motion on the floor, and are you, Director Moore, are you trying to amend this already lengthy recommendation, or do you want to create another motion to your liking?
Well, if the maker of the motion is okay with,
All right, then I'm going to ask you to read what the motion is then for us.
that the Recycled Water Committee recommended the Board of Directors to award a construction contract, Monterey, excuse me, that's the prior item. Let me
That's the
get to
previous.
Yeah. Approve a contract with Larry Walker for NPDS permit services, and direct Larry Walker to bring back for board approval the permit application,
The report of waste discharge.
report of waste, whatever that and
Yeah,
whatever else goes with that.
ROWD.
Okay, so are we clear on that? It's just a recommendation plus what he just said. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, you're good with it. Ron, any other discussion? Ready for the vote? I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, no one opposes, so we have passed. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
And I think you're on the next one too.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Next item is item 10. This is consider recommending approval of a contract amendment with E2 Consulting Engineers for updating bid documents and bid phase services for the CP 322 final effluent monitoring station project. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. So the regional treatment plant effluent configuration has changed significantly twice during since it was constructed in the late 80s. Due to the addition of the Salinas Valley Reclamation Project, SVRP, and the Advanced Water Purification Facility, AWPF. So effluent flows were originally measured with a propeller meter, but after the addition of SVRP and AWPF, they've been reported as a calculated number rather than a directly metered flow. So the board approved several contracts with E2 Consulting Engineers in the period of 2016 through 2018 to design a brine mixing structure that was intended to take brine from CalAM's desalination operation, from Advanced Water Purification Facility, concentrate, hauled saline waste, and excess secondary effluent. Supposed to mix it all, supposed to include blending, sampling, and measuring flow. The expectation at that time was that the desal plant would be constructed before AWPF. We know how that went. So in January 2022, the board approved a new contract with E2 for $79,566 to relocate the final effluent flow measuring system and design a standalone facility. Subsequently, a construction contract was put out to bid in September of 2022, but we only got one and very high bid received. And the board subsequently rejected that bid in November of 2022. So staff has requested a request to amend E2's contract by $54,887 to modify the plans and specifications to help encourage additional bidders with the hope of reducing the cost. The scope provides for bid phase services, attending meetings, answering bidder questions, preparing addenda, preparing conform project documents for construction. So staff anticipates going out to bid in February 2024. And once bids are received, then staff would come back to the board for award of the contract, the construction contract, and for additional costs for E2 required for engineering services during construction. So staff is asking that you recommend that the board approve a contract amendment with E2 Consulting Engineers for design and bid phase services for CP 332. That's wrong in the minutes or the agenda. I said it as 322, but it's 332 CP. Final effluent monitoring station project in the not to exceed amount of $54,877 for a total contract amount of $134,443. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any board member question, committee member questions? Sorry. Yes, Tom.
So what's the bids you got for the prior design were what?
We got one bid of $4.3 million.
What's the engineer's estimate?
The engineer's estimate at that time was 1.75.
Yeah, I could see where you might conclude that's a little high.
We talked to potential bidders and we found that The high bid was, one thing was there's this pre-manufactured structure that was much more expensive than what the engineer had estimated. Another thing is that in general, there was some insurance issues with some of the materials specified. And there was also at that time a very high rise in construction costs in general, and much more work for contractors. So a lot of the contractors said that they would have bid it, but it was just, they're just too busy. So we're hoping to correct the issues that were brought up and go out and get more bidders.
So the design changes you're looking for, I presume, are some different materials or different suppliers or more flexibility in the specification to try and reduce the cost.
Yeah, so, right. Actually moving some electrical conduits to be less interfered by other projects to reduce that cost. Essentially make all the changes that we became aware of that were issues for previous contractors.
And you don't happen to have a graphic to show where this facility is going?
No. Right. If you go into the right at the entrance gate, sliding gate, it's immediately to the left, inside the gate.
And up against the fence line. And how different is that location from the original design associated with the Cal and D-cell project?
It was slightly further east, but then against the landfill fence line, but slightly further east than the entrance
And
fence.
if at some point in the future a D-cell project is built that requires brine mixing, is there going to have to be a separate new brine mixing facility, or will this one be able to be used in conjunction?
Right. So the E2 is the designer of the brine mixing structure, and so they designed this flow metering structure to be compatible with the previous design of the brine mixing structure.
Okay. Usable for both.
Usable for both, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Checked with the public really quick online. I don't see any hands though for public comment on this item 10, and give them a second. I don't see anything. Bring it back to the board for further discussion and action.
Move approval. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Moore and Williamson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Hearing none. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We're on to item 11 now.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. My name is Jerry Balladale, Associate Engineer. The Ford Ord Interceptor is a 42-inch diameter concrete pressure pipe consisting of cement mortar lining, bar wrapped steel cylinder, and a concrete mortar coating conveying flows from the Monterey Peninsula. As part of the CP 312 Headworks Bar Screens diversion project, the contractor was to repair the concrete mortar, which showed signs of significant cracking and potential corrosion next to the headwork structure. It was discovered that the pipe was severely corroded with the estimated thickness loss of over 80% in some areas. The pipe cannot be rehabilitated, and approximately 20-foot long section will eventually need to be replaced, requiring a hot tap and temporarily bypassing the flow from all three interceptors. The project, designed by Carollo, went out to bid in October, and on November 3rd, only one bid was received from Monterey Peninsula Engineering for $3.6 million, $1 million over the engineer's estimate. Now, staff requests that the Recycle Water Committee recommend that the board reject the bid for the CP 356 Fort Ord Interceptor Repair Project, authorize staff to modify the bid documents as needed to reduce the project cost, and authorize staff to rebid the project. Now, happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. Board members, any clarifying questions for item 11? Director Moore?
How old is the original material?
It was 1984, I think. It was the part of the land outfall. It was before the treatment plant was built.
And the proposed fix is bypass temporarily and literally replace.
We're replacing it with a more corrosion resistant pipe material at that section where it goes into headworks.
Right. Any chance that once we get in to do that work, we're going to find more corrosion upstream or downstream that needs immediate repair?
I'm feeling that we shouldn't. This portion is exposed. It goes up above the ground, and it's an area where it turns to basically at the very end of the force main. It's gravity. I mean, or it's exposed to hydrosulfide gas. The pipe's not full of wastewater, and it's buried. It's a concrete. So right now we're not expecting any further damage where we're going to be tying into.
So as Jerry saying, it's not just a horizontal pipe, but the section is coming up, so it has headspace. So there's air in there, which obviously is more corrosive than being submerged the entire time. So when they chase it back to that submerged area, in theory, it should be fine.
Should be okay.
And you did do a cell-to-cell test to
Yes.
test that corrosion on where it is, and hence the reason we understand where it's fairly significant.
So there is no upstream because it goes right into our headworks.
Okay,
Right.
got it.
Correct.
Only downstream. And how do we hope to get better, or maybe get multiple bids second time around?
Yes, we did talk with the contractor who provided the bid to get some insight on the bid, and the biggest cost was the bypass line, the temporary bypass line that we need to do. They said it was kind of oddball size where they can't really sell it back, so we're looking at reducing the size of the pipe that's needed, which I think we should be able to do, and a different wall thickness. So I think we should be able to get a smaller pipe so that then when they do install this pipe, that they can sell it back, and so we can reduce the cost. And there's some other items too that you
So
mentioned.
their concern was recovery of the physical material used for the bypass line.
Correct.
Okay.
So keep in mind, this was just a small part of the Headworks bypass project, which was $4.2 million. And so to do one little aspect ending up to be this much seems like we need to be
Crazy.
creative, think outside of the box and see what we can do differently. And anytime you have one bidder, it's historical that you're not getting your best price.
The other option that possibly occurs to me is and this is a big if the contractor is installing bypass pipe and then when the project's done, selling that pipe secondarily, used pipe to somebody, would we be able to, as part of the contract, retain it for future bypass work? And would that be beneficial? And that may
It
be a
would be
question
big
that
bang on the
I'm
buck.
catching you off guard with.
Well, no, we certainly could. It's just whether we would ever need this size of pipe and this size of pump and such. We obviously have a number of portable pumps for situations. It's a pretty big diameter bypass. I mean, I can't imagine hauling that around to.
It's a lot of
and
pipes.
stuff.
It's like over 2,000
So
feet.
that certainly is an option, though.
Okay.
And I think you also mentioned, Jerry, I think in the staff report, lengthening the bid time, giving people a little more
Right.
time, trying to attract more bidders to
Right.
the table.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, but it's been answered. So let's check with the public really quick on public comment on this interceptor item 11. And looks like we don't have any. So we'll bring it back to the board for a further discussion. And I'll just point out I'm in support of obviously rejecting the bid that's that high, and then realizing that, and thank you for keeping on top of it and making sure we're not accepting such bids and recommending them and things like that. We appreciate it. Okay.
Move approval.
Thank you. We have a motion by Director Moore,
Second.
second by Director Williamson. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Valadeo.
Great, thank you.
We'll go on to item 12 now. That's a big long one. I won't read the entire thing, but it relates to our
Enforcement response plan.
ERP. ERP, yes. Enforcement response. I'm trying not going to use any acronyms. That's like it's acronyms on top of acronyms in this organization. So we'll try to avoid that. Thank you. Go ahead. Thanks a lot.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, members of the committee. Sarah Stevens, Interim Environmental Compliance Supervisor. Under its National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, Monterey One Water is required to implement an approved pretreatment program to prevent discharges that may adversely affect our conveyance and treatment facilities. As part of that approved pretreatment program, we are also required to develop and implement an enforcement response plan, or ERP. And the ERP outlines procedures to identify, document, and respond to industrial user noncompliance and violations. ERPs are routinely reviewed and updated as necessary, and Monterey One Water last updated the ERP in 2019. However, on July 31st, 2023, the board voted to adopt revised wastewater discharge ordinance 2023-01, which became effective on September 1st, 2023. Subsequently, staff has revised the ERP to incorporate ordinance 2023-01 in addition to recommendations received during a routine audit of our pretreatment program conducted in October of 2022. As a result, staff is here today to request that the Recycled Water Committee recommend that the Board of Directors adopt the revised enforcement response plan. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So this is addressing the various regulations and updating our plan, basically.
Correct.
Okay. Any board member questions?
Just one question. So pre-treatment, what does that refer to? What do we do in pre-treatment?
So we have an entire department that basically makes sure that if you're an industry that you're not putting anything down the sewer system that would adversely affect our operations, so our bugs, et cetera. And so she oversees the group that does inspections. We also contract inspections for industries. And so on the previous discussion where we were talking about the desal, they would have to meet our requirements in order to give us the brine. And so it wouldn't be a problem. We would be responsible for our MPDS permit, but we would make them meet our requirements. So they could not send us anything outside of what we basically let them know that they can give us. And I believe when we were in discussions in 2019, there was talk about when they could actually send us over the concentrate. So it would be during our high flows, et cetera. So it would be a well orchestrated machine. Sarah, do you want to add to that as far as your pre-treatment group?
No, just to clarify, it's taking actions necessary to protect the treatment works, and that's establishing technically based limits, issuing permits, and regulating our industries to ensure that we maintain that treatment process integrity.
Thank you for that clarification, because it'd be easy for the public to interpret the words pre-treatment as some form of adding chemicals or mixing stuff before the main treatment process, but that's not what this is. This is ensuring that the various methods we use to ensure that what people put into our system for treatment is appropriate and complies with our regulations.
It's not on your residential, but industry.
And it would also entail, Sarah, if I'm correct, we had to issue a notice of violation to some of those industries as well, right? They had to take corrective action.
Right, and that's what the ERP outlines, is that schema of enforcement action, when is appropriate to take certain actions, et cetera.
And keep in mind, when you issue a notice of violation, it could be for as simple as they didn't do their quarterly sampling or they didn't submit the paperwork to us. So it doesn't have to be egregious, but they're just not following the requirements. And a notice of violation, you send out, you give them 30, 45 days to get back to you and fix it. And if they don't, then you give them another notice of violation, the second one. So it goes on for several months to try and get them in compliance. So that's what Sarah's group has just updated, is what is our requirements when people are not meeting what they have set out that they would in our permits, the permits that we've issued to them.
But her work is mostly focused on mostly businesses and organizations that put stuff into our
Correct.
treatment. But isn't there though an argument that we sometimes also recommend even to our residential customers, don't dump a bucket of brand new paint into your sewer?
Right, and each of the cities basically is in charge of their own collection system, and so they have whatever their city does. And I'm sure each one of y'all's webpages talk about what not to put down the drain.
And that's all a form of pre-treatment, essentially.
It's outreach associated with pre-treatment, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Further questions? Yes, Director Arbedo.
So I have a question. So have you ever experienced an industrial user where you had to go past the second violation and get into the possible fines or court order?
Not to my knowledge. To give you an idea, in 2022, and we have a total of 15 industrial dischargers, but to give you an idea, in 2022, we issued a total of 4 notices of violations and 2 letters of warning. So we find typically that lower level of that enforcement response is effective at maintaining compliance.
Thank you.
Let's check with the public. I don't see any hands raised for a comment on this item relating to the ERP. Oh, I do see one now. We'll go out to Mr. Lobway. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Lobway.
Hi, my question was, what happens to the money collected through proposed violations? Does this money go back into the legal system, or is it going to programs that will continue to ensure that our treated discharged water poses no threat to the environment?
Thank you, Mr. Lobway.
Since we've not been had any collections at this point in time, I couldn't say, but most every monies that we collect back goes back into the general ledger.
The general ledger of?
The general fund of the wastewater fund for Monterey One Water.
Okay, thank you for answering the question. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Move to approval.
We have a motion on the floor to approve the recommended action. And a second by Director Stefani. And I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. And now we're on to item 13, staff reports. Mr.
Just
Shuto.
real quick, the California Water Reuse Conference was a little bit ago down in Indian Wells. California Water Reuse is a professional association whose sole mission is to promote the use of recycled water throughout the state. It was actually one of the largest California Water Reuse conferences to date. A little over 700 people attended. We did have representation there. Jose Guzman, our plant manager, had a presentation. Mike was participating in a presentation as well. It was always a wealth of information, and particularly at this time in California where there's been this inflection in use of recycled water for potable use, with direct potable use regs coming out at the end of this year. So that was Director Smith was there as well. I'm sure you'll mention something about it.
Thank you. Any further staff reports?
I just wanted to say that I continue to appreciate our team. In fact, while I was sitting here, we've got a gate that's stuck at the SVRP, actually at the pond, and they continually to handle issues and emergencies. And we actually have additional people on call for the storms that were predicted today through the next couple days. And so we continue to just meet all of the requirements as far as what heads our way. And I couldn't be more proud of the team that I work with. So thank you. I also want to state that Veronica Gilliam, who works in my department, she has dusted off the old pipeline. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the pipeline used to be a 4-page newsletter that was about the organization, and it got sent out to employees. Well, now fast forward, it's an electronic it's called Pipeline 2, and it covers over 2 months. And so we've had the second one, and so hopefully I don't know if you guys have received it, but we've had 2 of Pipeline 2s, and it's just very informative as far as new employees, anniversaries, any projects, any of the highfalutin tours that we have had, etc. So anyway, I just wanted to say that that's people are enjoying that. We've had several new hires, so I want to thank Lyra and her team as far as we had 5 people start in the last 2 weeks. So doing really well there. So thank you.
Any further staff reports? All right. So we'll go to item 14. Thank you very much, staff. Go to item for all the work that you do and everything you're doing. Doing very well, I will say. We'll go to item 14, committee member comments and reports. Would any committee members like to make a comment?
Thanks, staff, for your usual good work. Appreciate it. And thanks to the chairman for running a efficient meeting.
You're welcome. Anyone else? I will say, go ahead, Dr. Urbina.
So yeah, I would like to get a copy of the pipeline.
Pipeline 2.
Yeah.
I will say I'm not going to make a brief report because you're going to have to stay tuned if you want the scoop for my board report that I'm going to be producing on Water Reuse California conference, which is required by the government code. So I will produce said report at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, but I will thank staff for allowing me to tag along with past president of Water Reuse California, Mr. Paul Shudo. He's a very popular guy at these conferences. So, and it's a lot of fun. So, and Mr. McCullough was there, Rachel was there, Jose was there, and it was just it was a great time. I did take some classes, it wasn't all fun and games. And it is highly intellectual topics. I think Director Moore would enjoy it a lot being there, listening to some of the engineering stuff, and he would actually, he would be like, wow, he'd be all over that. But some of the Q&A is a little hard to follow, but I think the basic idea is, you're learning about water recycling. And for me, I found it to be really useful because I know what people are talking about. So now they can't, whisper behind my back. And I said, I understand that acronym. So I know what you're talking about. So anyway, more to come on that, but that's all I have. So we'll go to item 15, public comments, and any members of the public online wishing to comment on our closed session item, and I will read the item. Conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, City of Camden et al. Versus 3M Company. Case number omitted, and then the companion case, City of Camden et al. Versus essentially DuPont et al. Case number omitted. If anyone online would like to comment on said case or closed session, please let us know, or we will adjourn to closed session. And there's only 4 people left, and I don't see anyone jumping up and down. So we will adjourn to closed session at this time. We're good.
Yes.
See you. Bye-bye. Okay, got 16 or 17 announced from closed session. Announcements from closed session, Mr. Gilpin.
Thanks. The board is adjourned from closed session and there is no reportable action. Chair Smith, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. I believe we're at the time that we call adjournment. Thank you, everyone. Committee members, staff.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good one.